So John Anderson, welcome to the Legatum Institute. We are absolutely delighted that you are joining us today. And we're going to be focusing on character now, and then later this evening on how you have used your platform for good. So I just want to start by saying, really, or asking you, what took you into politics? You were the Australian, well, you were in Australian politics for 19 years. You were the Deputy Prime Minister. You were Cabinet Minister. What was your motivation? What took you in?
In many ways, the truth is that I was talked into it. A sense of duty was sort of, if you like, teased out. By my local member. My father had played cricket with him before the Second World War. My dad had gone off to a war which he loathed being part of, but he went out of a sense of duty. And he belonged to what the Americans had called the greatest generation. So the installation of character in him by his family and his, if you like, schooling and so forth was important and real to him. And by nature, he had to develop character to cope. And I had a feeling when I was asked and then pressed pretty hard to run that to honour him, I needed to be prepared to at least step up and have a go. Yeah. I don't think I had any idea of how tough it was going to be, but on the other hand, where it would take me.
Yeah, 19 years. That's a long time, but it's also time to actually really be able to build something. What do you look back on and think, I'm really proud I was able to achieve?
The honest answer to that, Philippa, is that more than anything else, it's that I was honoured to be part of a team that made a real difference in Australia. Yeah. And one of our most senior journalists, Paul Kelly, has written a book called The March of the Patriots, in which he argues, amongst other things, that there are around 20 years of remarkable reform with a clear focus on good policy and the political skills necessary to take it forward under the Hawke-Keating Labor governments and then the Howard government that I was part of. And to have been part of a reforming government, to have worked with people of the calibre and the decency, really, of John Howard and Peter Costello was an enormous honour. Yeah. To have been part of the Budget Committee of Five, the Razor Gang, we were hated for much of our work. It was unbelievably tough. Yeah. But of course, at the time of the great financial meltdown by 2006-07, Australia was out of debt and had money in the bank.
It was so unusual.
To have overseen serious productivity improvements in the Australian economy, to have been able to see the rewards for hard work play out in terms of lower interest rates, extraordinary improvement in employment, and indeed, for that matter, a rise in real wages, and other reforms that I was particularly proud of, simply because I was part of the team that did it. Yeah. I can't take any personal credit for. Things like the so-called new schools policy, which really opened the way for genuine choice for parents and choosing a school for their children. And in my own case, we were able to do a lot of good things in rural Australia. I have a deep commitment to rural Australia. But I was always very proud to be able to say to them, listen, you know, we are going to be able to do something about this inequality in health services or whatever, mobile phone coverage or local roads, but we're doing it off a strong balance sheet. Yeah. We're not doing it on the National Bank card.
Yeah, but it's interesting, you talk about some of those really difficult decisions that you had to make, but then your political opponent and leader of the opposition at the time, when you retired, said, I must say I'm deeply sorry to see the honourable gentleman resign his position. I think that the Deputy Prime Minister has made a name for himself in this Parliament as a man of great heart, a good-hearted family man. And I know that John Howard talks about you as a man of extraordinary integrity. And you were able to work across that political divide. How did you go about building those relationships that bridged the political divide at a time of having to make quite tricky decisions?
Well, it's very kind of people to say those things. I don't know that I feel very worthy of the things that they've said. But I don't know that I can give a simple answer to it. I do think that I have a very deep view, and have had for a long time, that even if you have to do it through gritted teeth, it is necessary to show respect and civility to others. What is civility? Just before I came over, an academic in Canberra at a conference on leadership being put on, which was put on by the Australian National University, just commented, Riley over dinner. He said, the Quakers of old thought that a civil person was one who looked for a spark of the divine in the person they were interacting with.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that we've lost with the aggressive secularism of recent years is the idea that a higher authority says that every individual matters, that we have a responsibility not to judge others, and to respect the fact that in the end, as our most famous Prime Minister Menzies once commented, we all bear the spark of the divine. All souls are equal in the eyes of heaven.
And is that how you kind of have overcome the kind of tribalism that's so associated with politics? Or how do you think through the kind of tribalism and what can be done to reunite people?
I think I've always tried to keep to the forefront in my mind the idea, that the knowledge that I am a deeply flawed human being.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I can rise in my better moments to a little bit of nobility, and that I need to recognise that somehow the dividing line between good and bad doesn't lie between me and someone else, or my tribe and another tribe. It actually lies somewhere across every individual's heart. And so you've got to look for the better side. But there was another aspect to it. My seat was huge, the size of England.
Wow.
And with demographic shifts, by the time I left, they'd added Scotland and they were about to add Wales.
Goodness.
And unbelievably, in terms of area, they've now added France as well. It's quite unmanageable.
Wow. Actually, that gives some hope for the African nations, because some of those are absolutely huge as well.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Well, that's true. Yeah. Anyway, the town of Moree and the district of Moree, the most agriculturally productive shire in Australia. And I was really amazed as a young MP. I was only 31 or 32 when I started out. And I'd entered, that pretty rugged environment, the Australian Parliament, and I had one of the most prosperous and forward-looking and sophisticated agricultural regions in the country. A lot of educated people, because they were well off and they'd travelled and they were experienced. They used to give me a really hard time, especially if I did the local radio show, which was a big thing in the town in those days, and they opened the lines. And I would hear in no uncertain terms, we expect you to lift your game. We want to see the tone of the Parliament improved. In fact, we feel often treated as though we're treated with contempt by our elected members.
So that was coming from your constituents?
From my constituents.
Yeah.
Yeah, the rugged Australian bush people that you never take for granted. John Howard used to say, never try and pull the wool over the eyes of a country Australian, because they follow what's happening.
Yeah.
They'll be on the tractor listening. They'll be doing long distance driving. They'll be listening to the radio. They will, they subscribe to the newspapers, or these days get them electronically. They know what's going on. And it forced me to do a lot of hard thinking about civility and respect, because you actually want passionate debate. You actually want the big clash of ideas to work in a way that sees a negotiation of the best way forward, rather than a descent into acrimony.
Yeah, so often in our debate here, instead of engaging the ideas, we write the person off.
Yes.
And that seems to me as though we will never get better ideas if we don't actually engage. Is that your experience?
Well, absolutely, and it's got a lot worse. It's got very much worse, because now what we tend to do is we'll demonise the person or the idea they're putting forward, rather than engage in argument around the facts and our different positions. And, it's a hackneyed old thing, I know, but Voltaire's biographer, with the famous line, I may disagree with you, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. Well, we've somehow switched it. If you dare disagree with me now, I'll fight you to the death. I'll call you a racist, a homophobe, a bigot, a hater. And of course, now for our young people, tragically, we've turbocharged their capacity to imitate our bad behaviour via social media. And they, unfortunately, many of them have taken to it with alacrity. And so young people can be incredibly savage on one another. It's almost as though they found a new way to bring back burning people at the stake. If you say something that's too unpopular, you'll suddenly find that you're cancelled, you're persona non grata. And I don't know about in Britain, but we've had some really tragic cases now of teenagers taking their lives because of this sort of ostracisation. Yeah. We need to stop and think long and hard. And so, you think civility's only, it's almost a wimpish word, isn't it? Hold your knife and fork properly and try and show some manners around the table and say please and thank you. No, it's not. at its finest, properly understood, it's a tough-minded virtue, even a duty that you may at times have to exercise through gritted teeth if you are to avoid the terrible mistake of giving offence and taking offence. And unless we can reverse that, I deeply fear, frankly, for our freedoms and our prosperity and our harmony going forward in the Western democracies.
And you, John, now from your time in politics, it's given you a platform. And you are, I mean, I watch you and the conversations that you're having, you are using that platform for good and for influence. How are you wanting to use it in a transformational way now?
Well, the idea behind it, as much as anything else, is to demonstrate that you can have a civil conversation even when you don't agree.
Yeah.
Now, I try very much via that mechanism not to cross-examine, not to engage in entrapment, but rather to let people freely say what they feel they most want to get over. And some of them, the most fascinating and rewarding engagements have been with people that I disagree with very strongly on politics. One of them, for example, Peter Baldwin, who was a cabinet minister in the Labor government, a left-wing member of the government back when I first started in the place. And his insights around how the modern Labor movement has surrendered its commitment to universalism and trying to ensure that the disadvantaged and the sidelined and the underpaid are fully included in family Australia, how that universalism has given way to the idea now of a new aristocracy based around people identifying some basis for self-proclaimed victimhood and then hanging on to that victimhood and then expecting everybody to say, well, we will try and meet your needs, and if you do meet those needs, they won't say thank you because they were owed it, and if you don't, then you're a hateful person because you're not affirming their victimhood. Very valuable insights from a man who really was, in my view, a member of a noble cause. I might have disagreed with his solutions, but his objectives were highly noble.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's so...
And so that range of views and demonstrating that you can talk them through sensibly. But the other thing that's really encouraging to us, I wouldn't call it a current or a torrent, but we get a constant dribble of younger people who write in on the website that's attached to our conversations saying things like, thanks so much for this, we're getting a diet here in one place of different views and perspectives that we can't get at university.
Yeah, and
the universities need to stop and think long and hard, in our country at least.
Yeah, no, I can see that. It's the same story in the UK as well. And it was Paul Kelly, the Australian journalist, who said, it may not be possible for leaders to succeed in societies that have lost their traditional virtue and much of the civic glue that held them together. Now, you've talked here about some of the challenges that young people particularly are facing. What do you see as the state of our society and the challenges that lie ahead for us at the moment?
I genuinely believe that if we cannot find again a basis for respecting one another, that's what I say. The elephant in the room, in many ways, to my way of thinking, is that we have washed and mocked God out of the public square, and with it the idea that we ought to love our neighbour. Yeah. We now want to compete with our neighbour, and if our neighbour is objectionable, we want to destroy them, cancel them. Yeah,
and is that some of the civic glue, do you think, that's gone as well?
I do. I think the civic glue, that really derived from the notion that's not understood now. I don't think we understand what we've thrown away. That a higher authority has said, I have to respect you. Yeah. I'm not your judge. Or if you want, think of Eisenhower as President of the United States, who said something to the effect of, never judge a man's motive. His wisdom, maybe, but not his motive or motives. Yeah. And I think we have to rediscover that and rediscover it very, very quickly.
So you've talked about that we're losing some of this civic glue and that we need to rediscover it. What does it look like to rediscover it and to build it back in again?
I wish I knew, but I think it begins
so do I.
with genuinely trying to engage with other people.
Yeah,
walking a mile in another man's shoes, as the Irish have it. Yeah. J.S. Mill said, no matter how, I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember the exact quote, but no matter how strongly you hold a view, if you haven't understood the opposing view, That view is pretty useless. And the work that Jonathan Haidt and his friends have done in this area, I think is absolutely invaluable in helping us see none of us have a monopoly on right and wrong. We need to be really careful before we presume that another person lacks morality, lacks conscience or whatever. On the other hand, I think we've sold our children a real pup. Now, they bought the pup, but we've sold them a pup. And we haven't given them the moral framework they need to go forward. I touched on social media, but I think it's worse than that. We've not demonstrated to them the need to genuinely respect others. After all, it was Frank Ferruti who said to me, and again, we couldn't be much more different politically, but he said to me, you know, I said to him one day when we were in conversation that posed the question, do you think freedom of speech is our primary freedom because of the one by which we defend all the other freedoms? And he shot back at me something very, very interesting. I'd never thought of it. He said, no. Freedom of conscience was our first freedom. And we learnt it when we realised that burning one another at the stake was barbaric and not very sensible, because the person and the movement that you take out on by burning someone on the stake might be the minority today, but they may not be tomorrow. It's not very smart. And so, if you like, we developed this idea that you really have to learn to live with one another's deepest differences. And I think that stood, if you like, as the genius at the heart of the harmony of Western society. If we can't re-establish it, I don't see how. I should be really careful, but as somebody who really loves Britain and always admires so much what Britain's given the world, I know that's sometimes unpopular these days. People condemn colonialism and what have you, but really there are so many people who live in such freedom now because of what evolved in this land. What a tragedy now to be confronted with a situation in Brexit where there's this sort of meat cleaver that's gone down the middle, and large numbers of the British people are saying, you haven't been listening to us, you've not taken our concerns seriously, you've not been civil, you've not been respectful, and now we're giving you no choice but to listen. I cannot imagine what would happen if some attempt were made now to say, well, we're just going to ignore what you said, we're going to find a way around it and ignore it. Why would those people ever participate in democracy again? And so in David Goodhart's language, I think we probably all recognise the value of his work. The anywheres really do have to cede some ground and show some respect for the somewheres, and we need to teach our children that same thing, or they won't enjoy the freedoms and the prosperity that we take for granted. Now, there's a really powerful thing to be noted, I think, in what's happened in recent weeks in Hong Kong. You've seen millions of people out on the street because they have been clear-sighted enough and courageous enough to recognise how valuable their freedoms are and how vigorously they need to be defended. And I think they need to be greatly admired, and we need to have our consciousness well and truly aroused by their clear thinking and their courage.
And one of the, you talk about the next generation, and I love your focus on leaving a legacy for the next generation. And what do you think we need to be focusing on for the next generation? What do you think some of their battles will be?
I love history. And I think I'm with Churchill, who wrote in the 1930s that any society that doesn't pass on an understanding of its past to its children, and he specifically mentioned its heroes and its religious beliefs, is in effect saying they're null and void, leaving young people directionless and without purpose and meaning in life. They're pretty profound words. We need a sense of place. If we're to work out where we are and where we go in the future, we can learn an immense amount by what's gone on before us. And Churchill went on to make the observation that Marx himself had said, that people without their history are easily persuaded. I actually, in a funny way, would like our children to not only have a much deeper understanding of their history and how their freedoms arose, but to have with it a deeper sense, if you like, of how to question and then look for the answers and then stand by the outcome, which is what I think the people in Hong Kong have done.
Yeah, and you're here and you're so known for your work on character and integrity, and you're here today speaking on character. We're in the middle of a leadership race, the outcome of which will be our next Prime Minister, and it has been a debate all around the issue of character so far. And what would you advise us that we should be looking for in terms of character for our next Prime Minister? Character is such a huge issue, raising right the way from courage to integrity. What would you say we should be looking for?
Well, firstly, I think character really is important. Secondly, I have to say I think we need to remember that politics is downstream of society in the end. It's about the demos. We as a people need to have character, and then we can reasonably demand character of our leaders. As a former politician, I find it remarkable that I often hear people say, they only seem interested in themselves. It's all about the big me, as David Brooks might describe it. Well, hello, that's what we instill in our children. It's all about you. When we see it reflected in our leaders, we loathe that value system. We know it's wrong. So we need to make sure that we're not trying to pull the speck out of their eyes before we remove the log out of our own. I actually think that matters. But having said that, well, look, the classic virtues are classic for reasons, aren't they? You know, prudence, humility, courage, and so on. Hope. I would say that they're all important, but I am always wary of leaders whose ego is so overblown that it sort of walks into the room before they did. Again, David Brooks talks about Eisenhower. Remarkable man, and well known in Britain, of course, because of his role in freeing Europe. He was so reluctant to sign up to be President of the United States, somebody else had to fill out the nomination forms for him. That's the sort of leader you want, I reckon. So that humility, I reckon, and an understanding of others around them, I think is incredibly important. But at the base of every virtue, when you go to exercise it in tough times, will always be found the virtue of courage. Nothing happens without courage. The ability to take the moment when the moment is right is a question of judgment. It's also a question of courage.
John Anderson, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for everything you're bringing to this country during your trip here. Thank you.
It's an absolute honour, Philippa, and delightful to be here.
Oh, thank you.